Welcome to Dead Harvey. This is where we talk about what's going on in indie horror and things that are related to indie horror. The whole point here, of course, is to uncover gems out there that might not be on your radar, tell you about some upcoming indie horror projects, and also give tools and ideas to indie horror filmmakers, because we want to keep the circle of life going here. We want to get more indie horror out there and get more people watching it. And you can help us by liking us, following us, going to deadharvey.com and reaching out and spreading the word, because the more people that we have following us, the more info we can get out there. Correct. So first off, for this week, we're going to talk about stuff that was in the news that we can chat about here. I don't know, we kind of like, there's a few things that are kind of interesting that are about sort of bigger budget films, but I feel they affect indie film. So let's start with those. And you touched on this last week, Brad, and you've seen it and I haven't seen it yet, but some theaters were charging more for the Batman.
Yeah, it was AMC specifically from what I heard. And so some people were getting their tickets from Regal and other places. Now it's going to make a shitload of money regardless. I mean, Batman, I think it's going to be on its way to $1 billion before all said and done. But and getting these like massive theater numbers, and it's a really good movie worth seeing in the theater, but their business practice of upcharging for $1 or $2 is pretty shady, because it's just because they can. I believe is the reason that they're doing it, or what it feels like to me is that the reason they're doing it.
Yeah, it's just kind of a strange thing to do, because now are you introducing sort of a sliding scale of pricing against demand, right? Like, oh, we can charge more for this, but does that mean, let's say, oh, we can charge less and get some indie films in there if there's enough demand? Oh, you're going to pay $25 to go see the Batman. If we can get enough people paying $10, we'll throw an indie horror film in the theater and you can watch it. I mean, that stuff's possible. And I don't know if, in my head, I'm trying to get it around. Is this good for indie film? Because all of a sudden, there's a sliding scale is going to be introduced, or is this bad? Just meaning like, they will only look at big budget films now. You got to get out. Don't even think about getting an indie film into the theaters.
That's what it seems like right now, because with the variable pricing, or with the difference in pricing, they're only experimenting right now on higher budget movies. So now if they were to do a thing where they did it all at once and said like, okay, we got like a low budget movie and that's going to be like $5 to go see, and we got like a medium budget that's going to be $10, and then we got Batman and that's going to be $20 to see, that would make more sense if they did it like that, because then you have more options. But just experimenting with like the movie that everybody wants to go see and making it more expensive, it seems very shady to me.
Yeah, and I mean, because I remember years ago when they flipped from actual prints to digital, that there was talk of, well, we could do on demand because it's just streaming, right? Like, oh, there's enough demand to put in this movie, great, let's screen it, and because we've got a multiplex here, there's a spare theater, if enough people want to watch something, let's put it up there. And I don't know if this feels like a step towards that or a step away from that, because it would be awesome if all of a sudden it's like, if you could rally enough people yourself to watch your film, and you go to the theater and say, hey, it's streaming, all you got to do is flick a switch, I want to have a theatrical release, and it's no problem for them, and they're introducing a sliding scale. That's actually kind of a cool thing. On the flip side, if it's just like, no, we're going to gouge you, and that's all this is about, it's not a good thing.
Well, especially the timing of it too, like to be able to like get people back. And they were doing AMC was doing a smart thing like a while back, where they'd have like favorite movies, and they'd have them for, movies that are classics like Raiders of the Lost Ark and whatnot. They just put that in the theater and you go see it for $5. They did that around like Halloween time as well too, which that was a great idea. But yeah, if they would just include that with movies of different sort of budget ranges, and Spielberg predicted this a long time ago, they're going to do variable pricing. Years ago, he was predicting this, but they should do it more fairly by starting movies, by evening out to movies of all budgets.
I agree. I mean, the idea of a sliding scale and allowing that to get other films in there is a great idea. Let's just see where this goes. So next thing is actually again about bigger budget stuff, but I think it affects indie filmmakers, is the Adam Project coming to Netflix. Now, Netflix is doubling down or tripling down on their relationship with Ryan Reynolds and doing big budget productions with him. It's kind of cool to see that you get these essentially, studio theatrical release, worthy films coming to the platform. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm more interested in the fact that this again deals with the paradox of time travel. And I always laugh at time travel movies. I think what this says to me is like, time travel, people are still interested. If they're going to throw by the way, Netflix runs on data and they understand what people want to watch. So if they're going to make a time travel movie, that means there's a lot of interest in time travel.
Yeah.
And however, you and I were talking about it before. It seems to me that the best time travel films are actually lower budget. The
Yeah.
higher the
Mhm.
budget, they tend to screw them up. Um, and my two examples are both Time Crimes, which was
Mhm.
extremely low budget, and Triangle, which was an indie low budget film, were awesome at exploring the paradox of time travel.
Yeah, both great indie horror movie examples of that concept, and also, as we discussed before, able to do well on low budgets because you can kind of use the same scene over and over again
Yeah,
but just approaching it by a different way. Yeah.
there's a lot of cool things you can do when you're dealing with time crimes specifically. Like I actually every time I talk about time travel, I go back to Time Crimes and just think it's such a well done low budget.
Yeah, and it has like the smallest cast in it as well too.
Yeah,
So it's like the most self-contained one. Yeah, yeah.
Self-contained,
Yeah.
tiny cast, and it is really funny and entertaining. Triangle has a higher budget, but again, it's just reusing the same shots over and over and over again. And then you go up a little bit, and I'm sorry, we talked about this before too. Tenant, which is the most recent big budget one to deal with time travel.
Yeah.
Now they blamed everything about why that didn't, knock it out of the park. But I'll tell you what, it just wasn't that great.
Yeah, it was just too Christopher Nolan for me, too convoluted, too long. I just like after a half an hour into it, I'm like, I'm not into this movie anymore. I like the actors in it. I think Denzel Washington's son is great in it. Robert Pattinson was great in it. But I got completely tuned out of that movie after the
and especially when it starts to do stuff, you're like, that just doesn't make sense. Right? It's not like, I love the paradox of when it's like, oh shit, if I went back in time, I'm looking at myself, and if I keep doing that, there's gonna be like 20 of me here. What do I do? Like that, like it's like that's the paradox. It's like of that kind of, in my head, that actually makes sense. You're poking fun at it. The fact that I can go backwards and forwards, and they kind of alluded to the time cop, like, oh, you can't see yourself.
Yeah.
But it's just like, oh, it's like, come on, like, what are you doing? So you're going backwards in a car chase. It's going, how does this even work?
Yeah. And the idea of stuff going backwards is kind of cool, but like when you watch it, it's not like too visually impressive, as like as a novelty to bring you in.
At first I was like, this is cool. Like I remember saying as you, I was like, long and short though is, if Netflix is dumping money into it, it means that there's a lot of interest. And if there's a lot of interest, and I'm telling you that the best films about time travel were lower budget, there's an opportunity for filmmakers or writers to make interesting time travel based movies. I think it's one that's, I think it's so hard to write an effective movie about time travel, but if you can, or come up with a concept around it, I think there's a lot of opportunity, because that's the one thing that stood out to me. It's like, well, Netflix is all about data. They've admitted this from the beginning. What are people watching? What do they know about these people? So let's make movies that they like. And if they're going to throw this amount of money towards a time travel movie, clearly there's still a hunger and want for time travel movies.
Yeah, and there's been a couple of like micro budget ones that have done it really well. There was that. Have you ever seen that one Primer that they made on $10,000?
Yeah, Primer.
Time travel. Yeah.
Primer's great. Primer's great. I forgot about. I keep forgetting about Primer.
So it's a concept if you're creative enough that you can really make work with a low budget. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, because you can get creative, because it's such a weird concept that if done right, it's interesting, because you're playing with that paradox of it. But it just feels like the more money you throw at the idea, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
The third piece of news that I want to talk about is actually two pieces of news here. And this, of course, is going right back to our exciting indie horror. And I don't know which one to talk about first, but I had to talk about both of them and lump them together. One, I believe it is an asylum film. Amityville in Space is coming out.
Amityville or Amityville?
Amityville in Space. And basically they were asked in the interview, it was kind of like, oh, so is this connected with the other Amityville projects? And basically the answer is no, and it doesn't have to be, because that's kind of public domain and I can call whatever the hell I want.
It's very ballsy of them, because they're breaking the cardinal in space rule of sequels, which is in space usually almost always takes place on the fourth movie, except for Jason 10, which they did as part 10. But Leprechaun in Space, Hellraiser in Space, Critters in Space, all happened in part 4.
Yeah. So, and the poster is just essentially the Amityville house floating in space.
I'm surprised they haven't done. How many Amityville have they done? They've done probably like 13, I would imagine, at least Amityville movies.
Yeah. And isn't the history of Amityville it's Spielberg, right? Like he started setting stuff in Amityville, correct? Like, or was it the Amityville horror? What am I thinking? We're like, what's the city that Jaws took place?
The name of the town in Jaws is Amity Island, fictional town of Amity Island in New York.
but that it was a nod to Amityville horror. Like
I believe so. Yeah.
And so anyhow, Amityville has been thrown around, and since it's public domain, like yes, there's the Amityville horror, but Steven Spielberg called the city that Jaws takes place in Amity Island, right? And
yeah, Amity Island. So it looks like the island of Martha's Vineyards, when it became more inhabited, the locals decided the neighboring island of No Man's Land should be renamed Amity in contrast to its more foreboding title. So that's probably like the movie backstory of it.
But, movie backstory of it. You're correct. But it's all a nod. And then all of a sudden, Amityville and Amity, like it got used over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And so basically, when multiple people are using it, it becomes public domain and other people pick it. Now, I don't know how many indie horror films out there throw the word Amityville, but essentially it's almost the same as Tromaville. Like it's just thrown around a lot. Mm-hmm. And people look at it and go, oh, Amityville. Mm-hmm. So anyhow, now shamelessly, Asylum is doing Amityville in space. So
I remember on an Eminem album, he referred to Amityville. No, he referred to Detroit as Amityville, and then also Hamburger Hill after that. So
yeah. So anyhow, I like how they're just there's one. Anyone out there, just throw the word Amityville in there, and you might get a little recognition.
Yeah.
Now talking about using public domain, the next one that I got excited about is they are coming out with Sharkula.
Yes, this is fantastic. I love that idea.
A vampire shark. Of course. And as soon as I saw the poster, I was like, of course. And the trailer basically begs the question is like, what if Dracula was a shark? Like,
yeah,
this is bad. And of course, it obviously makes sense. Like, so I don't know why it's taken so long. I'm sure there's been other vampire sharks, but Sharkula as a name it's so look out for that coming up this year. It's going to be
how did they miss this? Look at this cover, is great. It's got like it's got the shark busting out through the water. It's got these giant fangs, and then the water's just all like super blood red, and then there's a full moon behind him, and then there's like a vampire bat in the distance as well too. That is awesome.
Yep, there you go, Sharkula. So
a TV series spinoff, Sharkula's Lot. So it could be like there'll be little place where all the sharks are together in there, where they all get turned into vampires. That then they have to have like a scuba diver vampire hunter kill all these sharks.
It all totally makes sense. I see.
Use a harpoon gun, but as a stake to stake Sharkula.
Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense to me. Okay, so moving on from the news. Now we both took last week, picked a movie to watch that was being recently released. I went with an old movie. You went with a newer movie that kind of got buried. This one is the one I picked was kind of a classic, and it's just recently got picked up. I think I saw it on Tubi. Is it Tubi or Amazon? Can't remember. I think it might have been Amazon. Anyhow, it recently got picked up, and it's actually an old movie called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. It is produced by Samuel Arkoff, who's kind of the legendary producer who made B movies a thing back in the day. Like you can just look up Samuel Arkoff and he made some of the most classic B horror movies of all time. And this was later on in his career. Also, it was directed by Charles Pierce, who also did The Legend of Boggy Creek. So we can now officially tie this to Sasquatch.
Nice.
Which is of course, if you can tie it to Sasquatch. Anyhow, then those are kind of Charles Pierce's two big ones. They did The Town That Dreaded Sundown and The Legend of Boggy Creek. Of course, the most notable thing is that my senior film in film school was called The Town That Dreaded Some Clown. So I borrowed the name, although the entire the idea was different. Mine was about a clown that comes back to town, into a small town and starts murdering all the people.
Well, and there's multiple furries in there that were gangsters.
Yeah, there's furries and
a rabbit furry gangster, and then like
it was really a vengeance. It was really a vengeance movie. Now, what I thought was particularly cool about it, it's been years upon years since I saw this, and it came out in the 70s, and they remastered it clearly. But what's cool about looking at old movies like this is to see how much they did with so little. Like it reminded me of like you watch the original Friday the 13th, you watch the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah, like they literally just went out with a camera and filmed shit, and it was still effective. And The Town That Dreaded Sundown is kind of like that. It's just a dude with a bag on his head. And there's some cool scenes. It's low budget, and it's based on a real story, which just like Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of makes it a little more like, oh wow. And they really harped on that. Now thinking about it, which came out first? Was this before Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Oh, we'll see. We'd have to check, but this was 76. So let's check here. So original Chainsaw Massacre was 74. So original Chainsaw Massacre was
Right
2
before.
years before Town That Dreaded Sundown. It was funny because when I looked it up here, and I just like out of like sense memory just searched. I was meaning to search Town That Dreaded Sundown, but I put in Some Clown instead.
Of course, well, it's just,
just like an instinct. But I'm wondering like so the bag that he has on his head, and it's very similar to look that Jason has in part 2. So I'm wondering if that could have been inspiration for that.
It could have been inspiration. They all kind of came out, but clearly the Town That Dreaded Sundown is ripping off Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because it was very heavy at the beginning of this is a true story. This is
but it was like, yeah, true. But is it about like a home invasion, or is it about like a guy that went around just slaughtering people with a mask on?
It's about, and I remembered as I started watching it why I always remember the town. It takes place in Texarkana.
Mm-hmm.
There was just a bunch of murders, almost like what's the more recent one? There's this guy, like there's a couple making out in a car over on a date, and he just bangs on the door and slaughters the two of them, and then it becomes like a bit of a pattern, right? So it's like 21 days later it happens again. And but what's the one that has a bigger budget that they always talked about, the San Francisco one,
is it like a slasher movie, San Francisco?
Yeah, but they made a bunch of movies. It had like not Scorpions.
Are you talking about Zodiac or
Zodiac Killer?
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
So it's very Zodiac Killer like, where it's like he's out there killing people. And anyhow, I just like watching it. You could tell there's no big stars in it.
Yeah,
it has murder. It has some the hot chicks of the time. And it's just, they did a lot with so little. Like the budget had to be low on this, and this is still considered a classic indie horror film. And I think, like looking at it here, it had a budget, I mean, back then of like $400,000, so like next to nothing. But anyhow, good to watch, good to revisit. It really reminded me that like if you really dial back what these horror films were, they weren't much. Like there wasn't much to them, and they were effective. So it's cool to go back and check it out.
Yeah, and part of what made I was thinking about some of the stories I've heard about Chainsaw, like because it's similar kind of look and feel to this one. As part of what made Chainsaw so effective is when they were going through hell when they were filming. So there was like the reek of vomit was everywhere. It was like blistering hot sun. Leatherface hadn't showered in 3 weeks. There's all these sort of elements together. People were just going through a complete torture on that set. You just hear like that blood curdling scream and like that look of terror in her eyes. Like she just could die there right away, and you can see it. That probably had some effect on that.
There's probably some legitimateness to it. So if you want to check out, it was recently picked up. I can't remember what channel it's on, but
well, they recently added it to Shudder.
Yeah,
and then
Shudder,
it's also on Epix as well too. Yeah,
it could be. So Shudder's out there if you want to see a classic. Check it out. It's on Shudder.
Yeah, did this one hold up like you remembered, or?
You know what? It's remastered, so it actually, like at first I was like, "Wow, it looks pretty good," but it's clearly remastered. And I mean, yeah, it's low budget. There's some weird stuff in it every now and then, but you know what? It holds up. Like for no more or less than Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Friday the 13th. I mean,
cool. I will.
Yeah, the deaths, I mean, aren't as good, but none of the deaths were really that great. Like notoriously, Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't show them, and it was implied. And, and there's some of that here, and some of the effects are not great. But hey, you know what? For what it is, not bad.
Yeah, the Saw is still king for drive-in movies, but this one I've heard quite a bit about, and I've never actually seen this one, so much as I've heard it referenced and seen it referenced, I need to check that out.
Yeah. All right. Now you last week picked Director's Cut, which is an Adamrifkin film, and it's one that I had read about. I think came out 2016, 2017, and it kind of got buried, and then recently percolated up. And how was that?
Oh, it was actually really cool. I had heard quite a bit of recommends on this from sites, and then I was listening to Chris Gore talk about it from Film Threat, and I was like, and that was just recently. So I was like, this is one that I've been meaning to check out for a while. And I dig Adamrifkin's movies. And I like the fact that he operates in both the high budget and completely fringe, like micro budget world. Like he did a documentary on Giuseppe Andrews. He's always done kind of like off the radar stuff. Like I was talking about before, The Dark Backwards, a fantastic movie with Bill Paxton and Judd Nelson.
Yeah, and he's really run the gamut too. Like he's run everything from family-friendly movies to horror films.
Yeah, that's what's really cool about him, is he's really versatile, and he's sort of like, he always seems like he's like a little bit like you don't hear about him as much as you should, but he's done some really cool stuff in movies. And this one right here it's a cool concept. It's basically like there's a guy who's taken or put a bunch of money into crowdfunding for this project. So Adamrifkin plays himself on the movie, and the main actress in it, Missy Pyle. So Penn Jillette is the stalker in the movie, and he's also like this main crowdfunder who has access to like interviews with the stars, dinner with the stars, and able to like kind of like lurk around on the set. But he starts creeping everybody out and he starts following her around, and then he ends up kidnapping her, and then he sort of steals the movie, and then he makes his own version of the movie and to make it like the way that he wants it to be, or like from his viewpoint, which is hilarious because like when he does his own edit of the movie, he sort of narrates it throughout. And when he does his own edit of the movie, he puts in like all this super low budget. So if there's going to be like a car chase scene, he'll do it with like some Hot Wheels and stuff like that. So it kind of reminded me of like when they do like the super when they did the movie Be Kind Rewind, where they made like their own like low budget version of the movies in the blockbusters. That's sort of like what he's doing, but like much more poor execution to it. And then he does like all this like really bad green screen and super bad acting when he puts himself in there as well too. And he does that with her as like the victim for it. But it's a cool approach to like the whole found footage movie, and like adding that crowdfunding element in there. It's a pretty unique movie. It's definitely worth watching.
That's cool. I mean, yeah, you look back at what Adamrifkin made. Like you look, it's really all over everything from Psycho Cop 2 to Small Soldiers. To go
Mousetrap was like one of his
Mousetrap. Detroit Rock City.
Detroit Rock City is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny how he's just all over the place, but in a really cool way. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I just remember like I said, I haven't seen it yet, but now I know it's there. But it was one that I'd heard about when it was coming out, and just kind of, sometimes movies disappear and you can't find them.
Lots of movie references in it also. So if you're like a film buff, like good to check out for that, or just like a really sort of unique spin on a found footage horror movie as well.
Cool. And I also think like found footage is good stuff for people to watch because it's so cheap to make.
Yeah.
Like so get to know some found footage films that work, because that's a great way to keep a budget low.
And it was great too. Is it like when he's using when Penn Jillette's doing his own version of the movie, you can make as many mistakes as you want, and it would fit like what the character would do for the movie. So it allows you a lot more leeway for that way as well too.
Yeah, keep the camera rolling.
Yeah,
keep the camera rolling. Cool. So now let's look to new stuff that's coming out this week that we're going to watch and talk about next week. For me, I'm randomly, this one is on Tubi, but I'm spinning the wheel of Tubi a little bit and kind of looked at the new releases coming out, and I'm picking a film called Cupid. It came out in 2020. Looks low budget, gonna be on Tubi. Synopsis is that after being horrendously embarrassed by mean girls at school, Faye, a practicing witch, summons the evil Cupid to take revenge on all those who wronged her. One, it says also people who like this also like Sharks of the Corn and Slumber Party Massacre, so it's in good company. But also I kind of like the idea that it's a character / creature that doesn't really get too much play. Like think about like
that's true. Yeah,
like there's hey, vampires have been overdone, and like we've seen lots of leprechauns. We've seen like a Cupid is actually kind of a creepy deal, and they have a bow and arrow, and they kind of fly around and shit. They're trying to shoot people and put like weird spells on them.
Right.
They don't really explore that too much. There have been other Cupid films, but I am going to give a nod to this one because I like that they're going with Cupid, and it's got cool cover art. Not sure it's going to match. They've already shown screenshots of what the Cupid looks like. Certainly doesn't match the cover art, but yeah, I like the concept. So I'll be reporting back on this one next week.
Yeah, the concept of like a little like angry baby that runs around and shoots people with arrows, but is maybe like diabolical, is a great idea. And there was a movie called Valentine, I think it was like in the 90s, and I remember the killer had like this little like angelic kind of cherub baby face when he would attack people. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I can't remember the movie very well, but I remember saying like they haven't really tapped into this concept, and you haven't seen it tapped into that much more after then as well too.
No, yeah, I mean, it's creepy. So I mean, they've done enough. Like, well, we always talk about like Christmas ones. There's no, but like when it comes to like Christmas stuff and things like that, I mean, we've had killer gingerbread man, killer Santas. We've had lots. There's lots of witches, lots of stuff. It's like, no, Cupids are like, these are, it's kind of creepy. It's creepy shit. So anyhow, that's mine. I'll report back on that. What are you looking at next week?
I'm looking at the Cleaning Lady. I've seen this movie before. and meant to talk about this for a while. It's a really cool, low budget kind of stalkerish movie, in the vein of Single White Female, about this lady that's like she's a maid, but she's disfigured, and so the owner sort of takes pity on her and helps her a little bit, but then the maid, of course, starts stalking her and trying to act and be like her, and forms way too much of an attachment. So it turns into a straight up horror movie from there, but not a more tame horror movie like you'd see with a Lifetime kind of stuff.
Yeah. It
turns into more like a legit indie horror movie with an edge. It's pretty cool. So it's a great movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very under the radar.
Yeah. And the first time I ever saw movies like this was probably Single White Female. Probably the first one that kind of put it on everyone's radar. The creepy person who comes in and they're all nice. Hey, this is a great fit. And then all of a sudden turns psycho. Yeah. And then you saw a lot of that. After Single White Female, there was a bunch of them, but it is a creepy concept. It's still, I mean, you've seen a lot of stuff recently, maybe more around social media, where people befriend each other on social media and it turns bad. But it's a cool concept because it's scary.
Because it's somebody in your house that you trust.
Yeah.
And exactly.
And they turn bad because you're like, shit, I don't really know this person.
Right?
Yeah. It's a cool, I mean, I think there's it's also kind of a lot like, it reminds me of like Stepfather and stuff like that too, right? Where it's like, hey, this person's in my house, we're supposed to be all getting along, but this is not the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, if you want to see how this pans out in real life, just start looking for roommates on Craigslist.
We can have this story in real time.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I mean, that's it. That sums everything up. So if you like the stuff we're talking about, if you're a filmmaker, reach out to us, deadharvey.com. You can find our email address there and other info. Follow us on social. But like if you have a film you want us to talk about, or a project or film festival you think we should read up on and talk about it, shoot us a note, let us know. Otherwise, wherever you see this, comment, like it, share it. We want to get more people following us, because the more we do that, the better it's going to be for indie horror film. And that is the plan here. So that's all I got for this week. What about you?
Oh, that's it. We will see you next week with some new movies and some new news, hopefully about not how everything's getting more expensive, but it'll probably have something to do with that.
Or more shark movies.
Yeah, save up your money for 6 months to go see a movie at the theater and get some concessions.
All right, until next week.
All right.